At the turn of the millennium, I went all in and got a freshly released ABIT VP6 with dual Pentium 3s. As with most, if not all VP6 boards, the cap swelled up and popped. My original rig ended up in a dumpster, but for a very long time I have been searching and collecting parts to rebuild this epic rig. The project is now pretty much complete, but with multiple faulty parts. The motherboard I found was of course broken, as most of them are. In a previous video we managed to get it from a black screen to partially working. If you want to watch the first repair and the transformation of this Chieftec Dragon into this crazy green tower, you can find the link in the description and at the end of this video. I had some issues with a diskette drive that turned out to be a non-standard connector for the drive. I swapped it to an older cable without keying and was able to install it the other way around. That solved the problem. When trying to actually use it though, it turned out to be very glitchy. Since then, I managed to find another diskette drive with an identical front panel. I swapped the front panel, so now this working drive has the green panel. The first ID channel is completely dead unfortunately. The second ID channel will work with the CD-ROM drive, but won't work with hard drives at all, and it won't boot from the CD-ROM. The RAID controller still works though, so we can boot the machine with a hard drive connected to ID 3 or 4. Both USB ports at the back are completely dead. They don't show up in the device manager, and the LED on the drive doesn't light up. I have also flashed the BIOS to the last version I could find online, and installed some fresh drivers for the chipset with the help of a USB in the PCI slots, so at least all the slots are working. The GeForce TI 4200 is broken too, of course. It displays dots all over the display in DOS, and in Windows it creates these blue bars. I mentioned in the first repair video that I was tempted to install a matching zip drive in this tower. Luckily Viewer Tab Mode decided to send in a donation to the channel, so now we have a zip drive to respray in that crazy green color. The other items will be used in other planned videos. Thank you for the generous donation. The CD-ROM I resprayed apparently can't read burned discs, so that was a bit of a fail. However, 2 weeks ago we found a matching CD-ROM drive in an IBM 350 video. I replaced the drive in the IBM to a matching drive, so now we actually have a drive made in September of 2000. Perfect match, but unfortunately it's broken too. Let's start with this drive, because I want to respray it and let it dry while we repair the motherboard. If you have seen the IBM 350 video, you know that this drive wouldn't eject, but when we took the lid off and put it back on, the drive started to work normally. Unfortunately, the problem seems to have reappeared. So if we turn the power on, I can hear the drive trying to eject, and then nothing. So let's get that lid off again and see if that solved the problem. No, it didn't. It still gets stuck. I can see how it tries to move this thing here sideways. Let's open it manually and turn the power on again. Yeah, now it works again. Well, this is difficult to get on camera, but this large part here has 2 tabs, and those 2 tabs are sliding in these 2 grooves here. So I'm just going to take a big chunk of grease and add inside here, and I'm using a plastic friendly grease. So let's turn the power on again and see what happens when we eject. Still gets jammed. Okay, well inside here we actually have access to the cog that is driven by the motor, and it slides freely. Okay, so this cog here is actually moving the head, and this is not the motor and cog that ejects the drive. But if we move this connector out of the way and this large PCB, Maybe we can see something inside here. Not really, no. I think the motor is hidden away underneath here. Not really accessible. So with the sled out, I can see a cog in here. That's probably attached to the motor. Unfortunately, I can also see a belt here. So that might be causing this issue. Although that belt looks fine. It doesn't look damaged or dried up. Oh, now I can actually see the motor. It's down here. Not the easiest drive to take apart. Because the front cover here doesn't have any tabs that are accessible from outside. But I think if we remove this panel first, I think we can slide the entire drive out. And here are the tabs. Okay, so use the small screwdriver and pushed on these tabs. That released the front panel. Well, it's hard to tell, but I think this belt is okay. It doesn't feel stretched and it doesn't look dry. And the sled moves quite freely in and out. Let's try with some power again. Yeah, it moves just fine. I can't see anything obviously wrong with this drive. Well, I have spent a few minutes just looking at how this thing is made. And there is a plastic tab inside here that slides inside this thing here. And in a closed position it ends up here. So I'm gonna apply some fresh grease here and make sure it can move freely. Well, it ejects freely now. But I can't say for sure if we fixed it or not. I decided to remove the belt and clean it with alcohol in case it was sticky, and it definitely looks fine. Better clean these off too with some IPA. Okay, I'll put the belt back on. As long as it works, there isn't much I can test. Well, I don't really know if we fixed anything, so if you know anything about these drives, please let me know. And if it gives me any more trouble, I will revisit this drive in a future video. Okay, zip drive tested and working. Let's get that front panel off. And it's actually held in place with sticky tape. That's a bit unusual. I guess I'll try to reuse it. It also has a tab on each side. Well, that was easy. And just like the diskette drives, it has a tiny little spring in here that is going to be a pain to put back on. We better remove that see-through window for the LED on the front panel of the CD-ROM drive. We don't want to respray it, of course. Next up we have the hard drive cradle. At one point I had 5 of these in my original rig. But let's install at least one, purely for nostalgia. Looks pretty much unused. So let's see how this works. So instead of installing the hard drives inside the case, I just installed one of these in one of the bays. And let's see how this comes apart. Ah, there we go. And then I just installed a hard drive inside this cradle here. Some of these were hot swappable, but this is just a basic model. Yeah, pretty sure this is new old stock, because I got all the screws and the keys. Well, we are going all in with this project, so I'll respray it in green too. Well, the system doesn't recognize the hard drive, but I noticed there are some wires hooked up to the lock, so maybe it needs to be locked to work. Yeah, now the LED lights up green. And the hard drive shows up in the system. Yep, here's the drive, so we're all good. This cradle came with a noisy little fan inside. So that should keep the hard drive nice and cool. Okay, so let's see if we can fix this board. But first I'd like to thank PCBWay for sponsoring today's video. Aside from making excellent PCBs, as shown in many of my videos, they also do CNC machining, sheet metal fabrication, 3D printing and injection molding. Perfect for vintage computer projects like this. Get an instant quote now at PCBWay.com. And don't forget to check out their shared projects page. That's where I have found many of the projects we have used on this channel. Thank you PCBWay for supporting this channel. Okay, so when I got this board it was missing a bunch of components. So I reached out to you guys, and I got some help to identify the missing components by a fellow YouTuber. We replaced the missing components, but unfortunately the board still wouldn't post. So then I went online and found a list on badcaps.net with recommended caps to replace on these boards. Since that partially fixed the board, it only makes sense to replace the remaining caps. Let's start with this cap here. It doesn't have any exposed traces on either side, but it sits very close to the USB port. So that's definitely one of the suspects. This board is sucking up heat like nothing I have worked on. So before I desolder these caps, I heat the board up with a cheap heat gun for about 30 seconds. And I heat up a large area, not just where the cap sits. So the ground plane basically acts as a big heat sink, especially in this corner here. Okay, let's see if that was enough. No, it wasn't. This corner is pretty extreme, so I'll give it 30 more seconds with the heat gun. Okay, let's try again. I'm heating up each pad for about 10 seconds with a desoldering gun first. Yeah, that did a trick. And that cap just fell right out. And that cap was a Jack-on branded 220 micro 16 volts. And I'm going to replace it with one of these funky red Worth branded caps. I think I went with Panasonic's in that first recap. But today I went with these. I'm sure they are good too. There is actually another cap very close to the USB port here. So now I'm just going to heat for 30 seconds. Yeah, preheating the board with a heat gun makes a huge difference. And it makes a recap really easy on one of these boards. And we've got one more Jack-on branded cap. This one is 100 micro 16 volts. My fresh red cap is slightly chunkier, but it still fits nicely. I actually went through the trouble and measured all the caps when I ordered to make sure that all of them would fit. Okay, let's heat the board again. And I just did an unplanned test of the cord to my desoldering gun. My soldering iron fell on the cable and it was sitting there for a good 30 seconds before I noticed. But it didn't even leave a mark. So thumbs up for my desoldering gun. So another Jack-on, 100 micro 16 volts. I guess Jack-on didn't make great caps. So I used my original board back then as my main rig for a couple of years. And then I got a new machine and turned my VP6 into a file server. That's why I had so many hard drives and hard drive cradles in it. Those were the days of file sharing. Okay, next we have a whole row of caps here, sitting very close to the power connector. Let's just grab all of these in one go. I even think they have the same value. Well, that was actually quite stubborn. So I'm gonna have to add some more heat. So more Jack-on branded caps. And these are 10 microfarad 25 volts. These came with funny legs, so I'm just gonna snip them off. Okay, next up we have these caps here, between the PCI slots. They are probably okay. Or at least they're not causing any trouble, because all the PCI slots seems to be working. And all these happy caps on the board, they have already been replaced. And that's why this board now posts. Okay, let's get these caps off the board. Yeah, that one just fell right out. Yeah, this method is so easy. In part 1 we noticed that someone had worked on this board before me, because someone melted this plastic tab here when replacing this cap. More Jackon branded caps, 100 micro, 16 volts. These caps are slightly larger too, but I made sure the spacing was right and they would fit. Next we have a cap hidden away underneath here. And the reason why this cap here is laying flat is because some graphics cards wouldn't fit. So I decided to bodge that large cap. Now that I think about it, maybe my graphics card is good. What if those problems on the screen were caused by this cap here? Because it's sitting very close to the AGP slot. I guess we'll find out in a minute. That didn't go too well. I think we need some more heat here. So I'm only heating up the board for about 30 seconds on each attempt, to avoid overheating the board. Yep, that did the trick. I think I'm gonna lay this cap flat too, because that way I can push this cap here all the way down to the board. Yeah, it looks a bit funny, but this way I can use whatever graphics card I want. I almost missed this tiny cap here, hiding away behind this connector. Yeah, that's much better. This cap was actually replaced by a previous owner. I know, because he didn't clean up the flux after him. I'm gonna go ahead and replace it anyways, because it has a big dent. And besides, it only makes sense to replace all of the caps. Whether that cap is good or not. Yeah, I can't read the brand, but this is definitely not a Jackon cap. Apparently Mauser didn't have a red cap, so I think this is a Panasonic. Well, I almost made a mistake here, because this cap here is a Panasonic cap. So I thought I had replaced it, but I found a date code and I definitely didn't. That is an old cap, although I'm sure it still works. But we might as well replace it. This cap probably fixed this board at some point, but replacing just one or a few caps on a VP6 board is kind of pointless, because they're all going to die eventually. Whoa, that was really stubborn. None of the other caps needed more than 60 seconds of heat, but apparently this one does. So I better reflow it, and hopefully the new solder will pull that old solder out. Well, I guess we'll have to try a third time. Yeah, finally, that worked. So let's get that rather toasty cap out and put a fresh cap in. And that's a very happy cap now. That was actually the last cap. I skipped ahead a bit, but there were about 30 caps in total, and all of them were Jackon brand, except for these two. So this board has been repaired at least once before. Okay, all parts have been resprayed and they have now dried. And I managed to get that tiny little spring back on. Well, the eject button is a bit tricky to get in the correct position, because it's completely loose inside. Oh, I see. It's actually movable in and out, so I guess we could put it in the correct position first and then push the front cover back on. I guess we'll reuse that original tape. I'm sure it's still good enough. So there you have it. Quite possibly the world's first green zip drive. We might as well install it in the drive cage right away and see how it looks. In that first video I ran out of paint before I had a chance to apply the second coat on these parts. So they have been resprayed again. And now they match the case perfectly. So let's reassemble the diskette drive once more with 2 coats of paint. That green color looks a bit more glossy. Back in the day I had an external zip drive with my original rig, but internal drives are a bit more classy and extravagant because you can't use them with multiple machines. So this case has never been used with a drive in this bay here. So we need to break this shield off without scratching the paint. Okay, let's see how this looks. That looks pretty fancy. This project is starting to look more and more like a year 2000 dream machine. I guess I could leave the other CD-ROM drive in the case too. It wasn't uncommon to have 2 CD-ROM drives back then. Let's hope this drive works now. I applied grease to all mechanical parts inside, so let's hope that was enough. It's a bit tricky to eject manually. Sometimes it just doesn't work. I had to apply power to get that damn thing out. And we now have a matching green CD-ROM drive from the year 2000. A small correction here. I said earlier in the video that this drive cage had a fan. It actually has 2 fans. There's one at the back too. I'm going to be extremely optimistic here and install a new old stock Hitachi desk star. The first one we tried in that first video was new old stock too. Still sealed in its original package. That drive was dead, of course. So let's give these drives one more chance. I think I'm gonna have to put this thing back on off camera. This is too weird of an angle. That actually wasn't too bad. And then we have this piece here to cover up the fan, I guess. That's better. We better put that lid back on too. I don't want anyone to see my desk star. There you go. That's a nice green drive. I had to do a partial disassembly before I resprayed the cage. So let's get that lock back in and lock it with this clip. Luckily it had these connectors, so it was quite easy to remove and easy enough to put back in. And then we have these 2 LEDs. Not quite as easy to put back on, but with the right tools it should make for an easy task. And finally we have the locking pin. I should of course have installed it before the LEDs, but I think this is doable too. Yep, there we go. I think this thing here grounds the hard drive to the chassis. I had to put that door back on off camera because it was quite finicky with that tiny little spring. So let's see if the hard drive still fits. It does. Well, that looks pretty fancy. Thanks to these rail holders. This case still has a full set of rails. That's actually pretty clever. I wish more cases had those. Well, this drive bay too is unused, so we need to break that shield off. Okay, I guess we'll install the CD-ROM drive down here. And the hard drive cage up here. I didn't know what to think about this crazy project, but this case actually looks pretty good. Now I need to find 2 more of these and install up here to make this build as close as possible to my original rig from back in 2000. We better lock that cage. I don't want anyone to find out that I have a desk star in this machine. I would have locked the door too, but I don't have the key. I just realized this tower doesn't have a badge. That's better. I'd say the case is pretty much finished now. So let's move our attention back to the motherboard. This is very likely the I/O shield from my original rig from back in the day. Unfortunately, it was a bit rusty, so I decided to respray it. I'm sure there's a reason why I shouldn't, but I went ahead anyways. Okay, back to the motherboard. Let's apply some heat pastes and get those golden orbs back on the board. And the RAM sticks, of course. Okay, let's start with the tests. Everything hooked up as it was before. So the hard drive is connected to the working RAID controller. This should work as it did before. Unless I messed something up. I hope I didn't. Well, it still posts. Well, we've got less dots, but there still are some. There are a couple here, and in this Energy Star logo. Well, I haven't connected the diskette drive, so we've got a floppy disk fail. Oh, here's a lot more dots. So it wasn't that bad cap. It is in fact this graphics card that is broken. And here are all the stripes in Windows. Okay, so now we know we didn't break anything. Windows encountered an error accessing the registry. It's Windows Millennium, so I'm not too worried. Oh, it found a new device. What's going on here? PCI to ISA bridge. And same thing with these drivers. CPU to PCI bridge. Something has changed on the board. PCI mass storage controller. 3 new drivers. Interesting. Well, have a look at this. Windows has found the following new hardware. Busmaster PCI ID controller. Huh. Okay, let's boot and see what happens. The only thing connected to the motherboard is the hard drive and the RAID controller. So CD-ROM zip drive and diskette drive is still not connected. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Well, there is this PCI mass storage controller that is still missing the drivers. Well, that's odd. Standard serial mouse. I have nothing connected to the serial port. So that's really odd. Well, let's move the hard drive to the first ID channel and see what happens. Okay, fingers crossed. I think the system hanged. This is taking too long. Let's reboot and have a look in the BIOS. Oh, it hanged pretty badly. I'm gonna have to force quit. So, let's see what's going on here. Ah, no. I think we still have a problem. It doesn't say none for the primary ID, but it's just blank. So it's still misbehaving. And it's not detecting the hard drive. Crap. It doesn't even try to boot. The system just hangs. Let's try the second ID channel. Well, it actually recognized the hard drive. But it says 0 megabytes. So that's not much. Disk boot failure. So no, we didn't fix the ID, unfortunately. So we can't blame this fault on those jack-on caps. Well, I guess we should test the USB next. No, it's still completely dead. So that doesn't seem to have changed much. I guess we should update the chipset drivers, since we have a bunch of errors. No, that didn't help. We still have an error for the PCI mass storage controller. Let's try the USB drivers. No, that didn't fix it. Let's remove these drivers and boot the machine. So let's try with the drivers for the RAID controller. Okay, well the errors went away, but unfortunately it doesn't even see the USB port. Okay, well checking the power is always a good start. So I have the multimeter hooked up to the USB. Let's see what we've got. So the USB has power. Okay, I've been messing around with this machine for a bit, and I've done a couple of reboots. Now these drivers are gone again. So just like before, it's asking for the AMTECH 82C686 PCI to ISA bridge drivers, and the CPU to PCI bridge drivers, and PCI mass storage controller. So these 3 drivers just disappeared from the machine again. And same thing with the graphics card. And every time I also get a message about new clock settings. So it seems to do something with the clock too. So something on this motherboard is causing 4 drivers to just disappear from the system. Perhaps I should say 5. because the USB isn't working either. That's a lot of faults for one motherboard. And now I've got Windows protection error, system halted, while initializing device IFS MGR, Windows protection error. Huh. Okay, I got that error on every boot, until I removed a few of the RAM sticks. So apparently I have a bad RAM, but that's an easy fix. So now I have replaced that graphics card and installed a zip drive. It seems to be working just fine. So, what a messed up board. Where do you even start troubleshooting fault like this? The IDE will work with a zip drive or a CD-ROM drive, but not a hard drive. So it's mostly working. I wouldn't be surprised if that USB fault is caused by Windows Millennium. Okay, I'll swap that zip drive for the CD-ROM drive. And as you can see, it works just fine. How odd. What a stupid tiny fault. Well, we clearly haven't fixed it yet, but I don't quite trust Windows Millennium, especially with those USB drivers. So let's install my favorite version of Windows. Well, the only thing I don't like about Windows 2000 are the 4 boot diskettes, just to start the installation from the CD. Since the hard drive is hooked up to the RAID controller, I have to press F6 when the installation starts. That way it will ask for the drivers later in the installation. Okay, and after diskette 2, it asks for the drivers for the RAID controller. Luckily I found them online. Highpoint HPT3X RAID controller for Windows 2000. Okay, it's done with all 4 diskettes. So let's start the installation. Oh, you're kidding me. Well, I have that desk star hooked up, and this desk star seems to be quite dead too. Let me see what I can find. Okay, I found a drive, and everything seems to be working. So I'll skip ahead here until something interesting happens. Okay, let's boot and see what Windows 2000 makes of this motherboard. This is the version of Windows I ran on my original board. Well, maybe it's nostalgia, but I think this version of Windows looks gorgeous. So let's have a look at the device manager. Well, the ID shows up here, so it has been installed by Windows. And here's the RAID controller. Well, I guess I'll connect the USB and see what happens. Absolutely nothing. Okay, so then we know the USB was not a Millennium issue. I may have found something interesting here. So this BIOS update has a fix. It's not clear exactly where the fix is, but the README says fix ID controller set to disable because system shutdown problem. That doesn't make much sense. But if it fixes an ID problem, it's definitely worth trying. So let's update the BIOS. As I mentioned, I have flashed the BIOS once, but I don't remember which version. Ah, that is crusty. Let's get some deoxit in that socket first. And make sure we don't have a bad connection. I'll pull this chip in and out a few times. And make sure the socket is perfectly clean before we flash the chip. Okay, let's flash our BIOS. Okay, so this file is VP6YT from 2001. Well, that went okay, so I guess we'll boot. CMOS checksum error. Defaults loaded. Well, I have the CD-ROM drive connected to the primary master, and it just says ... So that's not very promising. And the bloody camera just turned itself off. Just when things got interesting. Apparently my memory card is filled up. I guess that means this video is getting too long. Anyways, something flashed by in Windows. I think it said installing USB. So I decided to reboot, and now I've got this message on the screen. CPU is unworkable or has been changed. That is probably because we flashed the BIOS. Okay, yeah, that is completely off. Let's go all the way down. We are of course going to overclock this machine, but not right now. I'm kind of excited about that message. I think that's all we need to do right now. Okay, fingers crossed. Oh, you're kidding me. Yes! The BIOS flash fixed that bloody USB. Finally some progress with this project. By the way, if you like this video, let me know with a thumbs up. So I wonder what version I used when I flashed it the first time. Apparently this is the working version. Where is it? Here it is. VP6_YT. Okay, let's try that ID and see if that BIOS flash made a difference. Okay, hard drive hooked up to ID 1. Disk boot failure. So we're not that lucky, unfortunately. Yeah, unfortunately, primary master, none. So we only fixed the USB. Ah, that sucks. Oh, look at this. I moved the hard drive to ID channel 2, and the damn thing boots. And the BIOS update fixed the second ID channel, but not the first channel. This board is driving me nuts. This doesn't make any sense. Windows 2000 has finished installing new devices. You must restart. Interesting, but it didn't say what. Well, I guess we better boot. What's going on with this board? Well, I have no idea what Windows was installing. Maybe it was that USB, but I did a reboot. Maybe it was something for the ID. I'll move that cable to ID channel 1 once more. No, disk boot failure. So I have no idea what it was installing. Well, the camera clearly tells me to quit, but we're not done yet. If you're watching this in the future, there will be a link here to a video where we take on the only remaining fault on this motherboard, ID channel 1. And in the meantime, leave a comment below and tell me what you think it is. If you're watching this fresh, hit the bell icon below and set it to all if you want to join me in the next video. And now is a good time to watch part 1 of this project if you haven't watched it yet. I would like to end this video by saying thank you to my patrons. You guys are great, thank you for your support. Thank you for watching, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll start recording the next video.